Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. The Lighthouse at Widow's Point. I've been the keeper at Widow's Point Lighthouse for 43 years. That's what I tell myself every morning when I wake up, though the calendar on my wall hasn't moved past June 17th, 1981 in what feels like decades. The pages won't tear away, no matter how hard I pull. Maybe that should have been my first clue. My name is Thomas Blackwood. I was 32 when I took this post, running from a failed marriage and the ghost of a stillborn son. The irony isn't lost on me now that I've traded those ghosts for others far more persistent. The lighthouse stands on a rocky outcropping about half a mile from the main coastline, connected by a narrow causeway that disappears at high tide. The locals in the fishing village of Port Ardo warned me about taking the job. They spoke in hushed tones about the previous keepers, 7 in total, all of whom either disappeared, went mad, or were found dead under circumstances the town coroner labeled misadventure. I didn't believe in ghost stories. Not then. My first year passed uneventfully. I maintained the light, kept meticulous logs, and radioed the Coast Guard with weather reports twice daily. The solitude suited me. I found peace in the rhythmic flash of the beacon and the constant symphony of waves against rock. It was during my second winter when I first saw a ship that shouldn't exist. The night was brutal, a nor'easter hammering the coast with 60-knot winds and waves that crashed over the causeway, effectively cutting me off from the mainland. I was in the lantern room, ensuring the light remained operational, when I spotted it through a momentary break in the squall. A 3-masted schooner, sails fully deployed despite the gale, was heading straight for the rocks. No running lights, no distress signals, just the impossible silhouette of a vessel that belonged to another century. I frantically radioed the Coast Guard, reporting a ship in danger. They responded immediately, confused by my report. Their radar showed no vessels within 20 miles of Widow's Point. "Look again," I shouted over the howling wind. "It's right there, headed for the South Rocks." Even as I spoke, the ship vanished into another curtain of driving rain. When it should have reappeared, there was nothing. I kept watch all night, the radio crackling with occasional check-ins from concerned Coast Guard operators, but the phantom ship never returned. The next morning I convinced myself I'd seen a mirage, a trick of light and shadow in the storm. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was as real as the lighthouse beneath my feet. 3 nights later, it happened again. This time the night was clear, a full moon casting silver light across calm seas. I was in my quarters below, reading by lamplight when the foghorn sounded. This was impossible. The foghorn was automated, triggered by moisture sensors. There wasn't a wisp of fog in the air. I climbed to the top of the lighthouse and found the horn blaring, its mechanical components moving of their own accord. I shut it down manually, checking the sensors and finding them bone dry. As I turned to descend the spiral staircase, movement on the water caught my eye. The schooner was back, sailing parallel to the shore about half a mile out. In the moonlight, I could make out details I'd missed before, the weathered dark wood of her hull, the tattered state of her sails, and most disturbingly, the complete absence of any crew on deck. I watched transfixed as the vessel made a slow, deliberate turn toward the lighthouse. I reached for my binoculars, and when I raised them to my eyes, I nearly dropped them in shock. The name painted on the bow was clearly visible. Elizabeth Rose. The Elizabeth Rose had sunk off Widow's Point in 1878, taking all hands with her. The disaster was famous locally. It was the incident that had prompted the construction of the lighthouse in the first place. I radioed the Coast Guard again, my voice shaking as I reported what I was seeing. The operator sounded concerned, but not about the ship. "Mr. Blackwood, we've got clear radar." "There's nothing out there. I'm looking at it right now," I insisted. "The Elizabeth Rose, I can read the damn name. Sir, the Elizabeth Rose sank over 100 years ago." "I know that," I shouted, watching as the ship continued its approach. "Send someone out here, please." There was a long pause before the operator responded. "We'll dispatch a boat at first light to check on you, Mr. Blackwood. Try to get some rest." As if on cue, the Elizabeth Rose vanished, not into fog or rain this time, but simply faded away like a photograph bleaching in the sun. The Coast Guard arrived the next morning. They found nothing amiss beyond my frayed nerves and bloodshot eyes. They checked the foghorn system and found it functioning normally. The senior officer, Lieutenant Hayes, suggested I take some leave. "Lighthouse duty can play tricks on the mind," he said kindly. "The isolation, the constant sound of the waves. It happens to the best keepers." I nodded and promised to consider it, but I knew I wouldn't leave. Something was happening at Widow's Point, and I needed to understand what. After the Coast Guard left, I went to the small library of books left by previous keepers. Among nautical almanacs and maintenance manuals, I found a leather-bound journal belonging to Jeremiah Frost, the lighthouse's first keeper from 1879 to 1883. His final entry, dated 3 days before he was found hanging in the lantern room, described seeing the Elizabeth Rose approaching the lighthouse on a clear night. May God have mercy on my soul, for they are coming for me now. The drowned men of the Rose, I see their bloated faces in my dreams. They blame me for not saving them, though the lighthouse wasn't even built when they perished. I hear them climbing the stairs at night, their sodden boots leaving no marks by morning. I cannot stay awake forever. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. That night, I wedged a chair under my bedroom doorknob and kept my kerosene lamp burning until dawn. The weeks that followed brought more sightings of ships that had no business sailing. The Meredith Jane, lost in 1912. The Northern Star, which disappeared with all hands in 1945. The Windward, a fishing trawler that sank in 1967. Each appeared for brief moments, always at night, always silent as they glided through waters that should have been empty. I began keeping my own detailed log of the apparitions, noting dates, times, and weather conditions. A pattern emerged. The phantom ships appeared most frequently during the dark of the moon and on the anniversaries of their sinkings. But it was what happened on the anniversary of the Elizabeth Rose's demise that truly tested my sanity. October 14th arrived with an unseasonal fog that clung to the water like a shroud. From midday, the foghorn sounded automatically every 30 seconds, its mournful bellow seeming to hang in the dense air longer than usual. I kept busy with maintenance tasks, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that had settled in my stomach. As dusk approached, the fog thickened until I couldn't see the water from the gallery deck. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath clouding before me as I made my final checks of the light before nightfall. The beacon cut weak swaths through the mist, visibility reduced to perhaps 100 yards at most. I was descending the spiral staircase when I heard it, the unmistakable creak of wooden planks straining against metal fittings. The sound of an old ship settling in the water. I froze, one hand on the cold stone wall, listening. It came again, followed by something else, voices, distant at first, then growing clearer. Men's voices calling out sailing orders in the clipped maritime English of another century. Secure those sheets, drop anchor, all hands prepare to disembark. The commands echoed as if carried through a long tunnel, distorted but unmistakable. I continued down the stairs on unsteady legs, drawn toward the source despite every instinct screaming for me to lock myself in my quarters. At the base of the lighthouse, I hesitated before the heavy oak door that led outside. The voices were louder now, accompanied by the splash of what could only be a longboat being lowered into water. My hand hovered over the latch. This is madness, I thought. There's nothing out there but fog and empty sea, yet I opened the door. The fog swirled around me, thick as cotton wool. I could see perhaps 10 feet in any direction before the world dissolved into grayish-white nothingness. The voices were clearer now, coming from the direction of the small dock that extended from the rocky base of the lighthouse. I moved cautiously across the wet stones, my boots sliding on the slick surface. The temperature seemed to drop with each step until my teeth were chattering uncontrollably. When I reached the dock, the fog parted momentarily and I saw them. A longboat, weathered and encrusted with barnacles, was tethered to the dock's edge. Inside were 5 men in 19th-century sailors' garb, their skin the bloodless white of corpses long submerged. Their eyes, God help me, their eyes were black holes, seawater streaming from them like tears down their bloated cheeks. The nearest figure stood, the boat rocking beneath him. Water cascaded from his clothes, his beard, his outstretched hand. When he spoke, more water spilled from his mouth, yet somehow I understood his garbled words. "Keeper," he said, "we've come for the light." I stumbled backward, nearly falling on the slick stones. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice a terrified whisper. "You know what we want," another of the drowned men said, rising to stand beside the first. "What every lost ship wants." "Safe passage home." "I don't understand," I said, though a horrible understanding was beginning to dawn. The first sailor pointed a waterlogged finger toward the top of the lighthouse. "Your light doesn't save, Keeper, it leads to doom." As it led us, as it led all who followed, I shook my head. The lighthouse wasn't even built when the Elizabeth Rose sank. A terrible sound emerged from the standing men, a wet, gurgling approximation of laughter. The rocks were here. The point was here, and something else, something older than stone, was here, calling ships to their doom long before any light was built. As if summoned by his words, I became aware of a presence behind me. A cold so intense it burned pressed against my back. I couldn't turn, I couldn't move, I could only listen as the drowned sailor continued. "We are but messengers, Keeper, it sends us to warn you, the light must go dark, permanently. Or you'll join our company." With tremendous effort, I forced myself to turn around. Nothing was there, nothing but swirling fog. When I turned back to the dock, the longboat and its macabre crew had vanished as well. I ran back to the lighthouse, slamming and locking the door behind me. My hands shook so badly I could barely light the kerosene lamp in my quarters. I spent the night huddled in a corner, the lamp burning low, listening to the foghorn's regular bellows and what sounded like wet footsteps circling the lighthouse's base. Dawn broke with unexpected clarity, the fog burning away to reveal a calm sea and clear blue sky. I might have convinced myself I'd experienced some sort of hallucination if not for the evidence left behind, a trail of seawater and sand leading from the dock to the lighthouse door, and barnacles clinging to the dock where none had been the day before. In the harsh light of day, I made a decision. I could not extinguish the lighthouse. Whatever malevolent force dwelled at Widow's Point, whatever it wanted, I couldn't in good conscience darken a beacon that real ships relied upon. I radioed the Coast Guard and requested a boat to take me to the mainland. I needed to research the history of Widow's Point more thoroughly to understand what I was facing. Lieutenant Hayes himself picked me up that afternoon. During the short journey to Port Ardo, I kept my experiences to myself, asking instead about local maritime archives. "You'll want to speak with Elias Morgan at the Historical Society," Hayes suggested. "If anyone knows the secrets of this coastline, it's him." Elias Morgan proved to be a stooped man in his 70s with sharp eyes and a librarian's love of organization. When I explained my interest in Widow's Point's history, carefully framing it as professional curiosity, his expression darkened. "The point has a history that predates European settlement," he said, leading me to a back room filled with maps and documents. "The Abenaki refused to fish near it. They called it the place where shadows feed." He pulled out a portfolio of yellowed papers. "The first recorded maritime disaster there was in 1678, 200 years before the lighthouse. A French merchant vessel ran aground despite clear weather and an experienced captain." Over the next several hours, Morgan showed me records of 27 shipwrecks at Widow's Point, spanning 3 centuries. The lighthouse, far from preventing disasters, seemed to have increased their frequency. "Some locals believe the point is cursed," Morgan said, watching me closely. "That something beneath the water calls to ships hungry for the souls aboard. That's superstition," I said weakly. Morgan's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Is it, Mr. Blackwood? Then why are your hands shaking?" I left with photocopies of the most relevant documents and a growing sense that I was involved in something far beyond my understanding. I spent the night at Port Ardo's only inn, sleeping fitfully and waking often to the imagined sound of dripping water. The next morning I visited St. Augustine's, the small stone church that had stood on Port Ardo's highest point since the early 1800s. The parish records confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Many of the bodies recovered from Widow's Point shipwrecks were buried in unconsecrated ground. Their deaths ruled suicides rather than accidents. Father Collins, the elderly priest who helped me search the records, explained the historical reasoning. They believed those who died at the point had been called there deliberately, that they had chosen their fate. It wasn't until the early 20th century that the church stopped making such distinctions. "Called there deliberately," I repeated. "By what?" The priest studied me for a long moment. "The old one said a hunger lives in those waters. Not evil precisely, just hungry for company, for worship perhaps." I returned to the lighthouse that evening, my mind churning with all I had learned. As the Coast Guard boat approached Widow's Point, I noticed something odd about the beacon sweeping overhead. Its light seemed dimmer, its arc narrower than when I'd left. "Has someone been maintaining the light while I was gone?" I asked Hayes. He looked confused. "No, we notified the service that you'd be away for maintenance. The light should have been dark, yet it was operating, however weakly. Someone or something had kept the beacon lit in my absence." After Hayes departed, I climbed immediately to the lantern room. The mechanism was running, but several of the prisms in the Fresnel lens had been removed and placed carefully on the gallery floor outside. The light was functioning at perhaps half its normal brightness and range. As I replaced the missing prisms, a cold certainty settled over me. The entities I'd encountered weren't trying to extinguish the light to save ships, they were trying to alter it, to ensure it didn't shine too far or too brightly. They wanted ships to come, but only close enough to be lured to the rocks. That night I kept vigil in the lantern room, a thermos of coffee and my keeper's log beside me. The October moon was waning, providing just enough illumination to see the water surrounding the point. I watched and waited, pencil poised to record whatever appeared. Near midnight, the air temperature plummeted. My breath clouded before me, and frost began to form on the inside of the glass panes. The beacon continued its steady rotation, cutting through the growing mist that seemed to be rising from the water itself. Then I saw it, not a ship this time, but a disturbance in the water about 100 yards from the point. The calm surface began to churn, slowly at first, then with increasing violence. The moonlight revealed a circular pattern, like a massive whirlpool forming where no current should exist. As I watched, transfixed, something began to emerge from the center of the disturbance. Something vast and pale, rising from the depths with deliberate slowness. I fumbled for my binoculars, my hands numb with cold and fear. What I saw through the lenses defies simple description. It was organic yet alien, a massive, pallid structure that resembled nothing so much as the tip of a colossal finger, its surface covered in what looked like thousands of tiny, lidless eyes. As it breached the surface, the water around it began to glow with a phosphorescent blue-green light. More of the thing emerged, revealing what appeared to be a joint or knuckle. The scale was impossible. If this was indeed some kind of appendage, the creature it belonged to must have been the size of a small island. I dropped the binoculars, my body shaking uncontrollably. As if sensing my observation, all of the tiny eyes on the surface of the thing swiveled in unison toward the lighthouse. Toward me. The pressure in the lantern room changed abruptly, my ears popping painfully. The glass panes of the lantern room vibrated, humming at a frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I fell to my knees, hands clasped over my ears, as a voice that wasn't a voice filled my mind. "Keeper, feed me." The command was neither sound nor language, but pure concept forced into my consciousness. With it came understanding, flashes of knowledge about the entity in the water, its age measured in geological epochs, its hunger as fundamental as gravity. It had been there long before humans sailed these waters, drawing sustenance from the terror and despair of dying creatures. When ships began to pass, it found a richer source of nourishment. The drowned sailors I had seen were not its victims but its servants, bound to it after death, helping to deliver more souls to their master. The light, adjust IT, bring them to me. Images flooded my mind, simple adjustments to the Fresnel lens that would subtly alter the lighthouse's warning into a lure. Ships would think they were heading toward safe passage, but would instead be drawn directly onto the rocks. "No," I gasped, though I knew it could perceive my thoughts directly. "I won't help you kill." The pressure increased, threatening to crush my skull from within. The thing in the water rose higher, revealing more of its impossible anatomy, ridges and protrusions that defied biological classification. "You will serve, all keepers serve, or join them." A new vision filled my mind, my body, waterlogged and pale, rowing a ghostly longboat toward some doomed vessel, my eyes replaced by empty sockets that wept seawater. An eternity of service to the hunger in the deep. With tremendous effort, I crawled toward the lighthouse controls, not to comply, but to fight back the only way I could. I increased the power to the beacon, overriding the safety limiters, pushing the light to its maximum intensity. The pressure in my head became unbearable. Blood ran from my nose and ears as I pulled myself upright, staring defiantly at the monstrosity in the water. The beacon, now blinding in its brightness, swept across the creature. Where the light touched, the tiny eyes recoiled, the pale flesh sizzling as if burned by acid. A soundless scream reverberated through my mind as the thing began to sink back beneath the waves. As it retreated, I felt its rage and promise. "You cannot keep watch forever, Keeper. Sleep will come, and I will wait." By dawn, the sea was calm again, showing no evidence of the night's events save for a lingering phosphorescence that faded with the rising sun. I spent the day repairing the damage to the lantern room, replacing blown fuses and cracked glass panes, and contemplating my options. I could leave, abandon my post as others had surely done before me. But that would only mean another keeper would come, unprepared for what waited in the deep. Or worse, the light would remain dark long enough for the entity to feed unchecked. I could try to convince the authorities of what lurked at Widow's Point, but the evidence I had, my testimony and journal entries, would more likely earn me a psychiatric evaluation than a maritime investigation. There was a third option, one that formed in my mind as I worked. The entity had revealed itself to me, shown me what it wanted and feared. The lighthouse's beacon hurt it when operating at full power. Perhaps there was a way to make that effect permanent. That night, I modified the beacon according to my own design, not the entity's demands. I adjusted the Fresnel lens to focus the light downward as well as outward, creating a constant illumination of the waters directly surrounding Widow's Point. I reinforced the power supply, ensuring the beacon would operate at maximum brightness indefinitely. As darkness fell, I felt the familiar drop in temperature. The mist began to rise from the water, but wherever the enhanced beacon touched, it dissipated. The night passed without any appearance from the entity or its drowned servants, but I knew better than to consider it defeated. For 3 days and nights, I maintained my modified beacon, catching sleep in short bursts during daylight hours. On the 4th night, exhaustion finally overcame me. I fell asleep at my post in the lantern room. I awoke to darkness and the sound of water dripping steadily onto the floor beside me. The beacon was dark. Standing over me was the figure of a drowned sailor, his features barely recognizable beneath the ravages of long submersion. "It's time, Keeper," he said, water streaming from his mouth with each word. The master calls. I tried to move to reach the lighthouse controls, but my limbs were leaden. Behind the sailor, I could see others climbing the spiral staircase, a procession of the drowned coming for me. No, I managed to say. I won't serve it. The sailor's ruined face twisted into what might have been a smile. We all said that once. They surrounded me, cold hands gripping my arms and legs. They began to drag me toward the stairs, toward the waiting sea and its ancient hunger. In desperation, I focused on the emergency switch near the floor, a failsafe that would trigger the backup power system. With the last of my strength, I kicked out, my boot connecting with the switch. Light flooded the lantern room, blindingly bright. The drowned men screamed, their flesh smoking where the light touched. They released me, retreating from the beacon's glare, leaving trails of seawater as they fled down the stairs. I crawled to the controls, ensuring the light remained at full power, illuminating both the sea lanes and the waters around the point. Outside, I could hear the entity's rage, not in words this time, but in the sudden violence of waves crashing against the lighthouse's base. That was 43 years ago, or yesterday. Time has become fluid at Widow's Point. I've reinforced the lighthouse's power systems, installed backup generators, and modified the beacon to maintain constant illumination of the surrounding waters. No ships have been lost at the point since I made these changes. But the entity remains. I feel its presence, its hunger, its patience. It can wait decades, centuries if necessary, and it ensures I remain as well, trapped in this lighthouse, the calendar frozen on June 17, 1981, the day I truly understood what dwelled beneath Widow's Point. Sometimes supply boats come. The crews look at me strangely, these young men with their modern equipment and clothing that marks the passage of time I no longer experience. They bring provisions, mail, maintenance supplies. They never stay long. I've tried to leave, of course, many times, but the causeway always leads me back to the lighthouse, no matter which direction I walk. The boats that come never have room for a passenger, or they promise to return for me and never do. I am the keeper of Widow's Point Lighthouse, and I will remain so until someone else takes my place, someone who understands what lurks beneath these waters and has the strength to keep the light burning. So if you're reading this journal, if you've come to relieve me, know what you're facing. The hunger in the deep never dies, it only waits, and whatever you do, don't let the light go out.